Welcome back to another chapter of Upcycling the American Dream, the story of Hamilton v. Vortic. I'm RT Custer. Make sure that you stay tuned to the end, where I let you know the best way to follow along and see the next chapter. One of the things that people don't talk about very much in these huge federal lawsuits is something called a deposition. And I think you don't hear about it much because what happens during the deposition is typically sealed. It's part of court records. Sometimes, bits and pieces of it get released when you actually go to trial and when, the case goes on, because people reference the deposition in the court and in the court documents. And like the judge will say, well, during your deposition, you said this, and they'll, a lot of times the other side's attorney will try to catch you in a lie or say, well, you said this in the deposition, but I'm hearing you say this now, and lying under oath is wrong. And so the deposition is a really good way to put a line in the sand as part of the legal process. And really all it is a meeting in a conference room, and everything gets recorded. There's a court recorder there, somebody typing every word you say. Your attorney's there. They get to ask you questions, and you answer for the record, on the record. And then their attorney's asking you questions, and they're trying to get the facts. It's like fact finding, obviously trying to get you to admit things that would be wrong that they can then use against you in a court of law. And so for the deposition, for my deposition, I went to New York City, and we did it at the second attorney's office. So we started with our general attorney here in Colorado, and then at some point, kind of when stuff hit the fan, right around the time we officially got sued, we started with a New York-based attorney because we thought we needed one. And that attorney actually reached out, found out about the case, saw some of the case law, saw the official lawsuit come through, and sent us an email and said, hey, I love watches. I see what you're doing. I don't think you're doing anything wrong, and I'd love to defend you, and I'm based in New York, so if that's helpful, here's our credentials. And first person that ever reached out to say they could help, so I was like, yep, sold. I get to New York, get up to their office, and then kind of started to realize what I was getting myself into, and that we might be a bit over our heads. And I had that realization when I looked out the office window and I saw Central Park, one of the most beautiful corporate office views I've ever seen. Literally, this law firm had an office where every single partner had a view of Central Park, downtown Manhattan. And then I started getting really nervous about how much just this one meeting was going to cost, especially because the deposition could take hours, sometimes days, if it's a big court case. So they put my hand on the Bible, and that was the first time I got to tell the whole story of Vortic on record. And they asked me all kinds of questions, tried to get me to admit things that we did or didn't do. And, stuck to the facts, told everything that Vortic had done and was doing at that point, and documented our story for the records. And it did become the most expensive meeting I've ever had, and probably one of the more important and stressful ones at that point. But that was the first time I was like, okay, I'm in New York. Let me go try to get some press. Let's see if somebody will write about this. And that's when I started to realize that might be impossible, given that SWATCH Group, pays the bills for a lot of these publishers. And I had some meetings with journalists, and they were really, the journalists in the watch industry are spectacular. And so many of them said hey, I'd love to write about this. I don't know if I can, but I'll hear you out. Let's sit down. I had several meetings. It was great. What ended up happening out of the goodness of a lot of these people's hearts was, hey, maybe we can't write about this. And then the lawsuit, it's a lot. A lot of people said, which was a really fair point, it's hard to write about a lawsuit as it's happening and not take a side. And that was kind of the logical conversation I had with a lot of journalists and people in PR, and it makes total sense. It's hard not to take a side if you come into a lawsuit halfway through. Obviously, though, that was very frustrating because I felt like it was a David and Goliath story, and we had a lot to share. And I was just like, let's tell the story. I feel like I'm being bullied. Like, how do we get this out here? We got some press, we got some stories about certain things. So at that point, I think it was right around the time we came out with our Railroad edition for the first time, and so Kodinky and some other press did stories about the Railroad edition, which is great. Some of them had Hamilton movements in them, and so that just kind of inherently, some people in the comments brought up the lawsuits. That was interesting. Like I said, I think I mentioned it in one of these videos, but Gary Goodvanus, shout out to Gary, always covered us, talked about this from the beginning. There's a handful of people that didn't care and just published all those stories, and I love you and appreciate you. It's amazing. And a specific thank you to everyone who at least heard me out. Because that was interesting. That was one of the hardest points of my life and our story as a company, not just because we were so new, we were a startup, not just because we were getting sued by this huge company, but also because, life was happening at the same time. Tyler and I have both had tons of personal things happen in our lives across the last 10 years of trying to build Vortic. And like I said in the last section, that was right around the time my first son Sawyer was born. So I had, a beautiful, loving family and home waiting for me, but I had a huge lawsuit on my back at the same time. So it's one of those scenarios where work-life balance became almost impossible there for, a few years as we were dealing with this. So that was one of the many times I went to New York City to work on this.
Thanks for watching another chapter of Upcycling the American Dream. It's important to note that all the viewpoints, stories, and facts shared in these chapters are coming from me, myself, and I, Robert Thomas Custer. They are mine alone and are not shared by Vortic LLC, Vortic Watch Company, and its related parties. For our full legal description and our full legal disclaimer, go to vorticwatches.com/victory. You'll also find at that link a special offer and a link to pre-order our upcoming book. Again, vorticwatches.com/victory.